there's obviously an enormous scrap for eyeballs and attention. There's also a scrap for a business model that's sustainable. And I think the tension that exists in trying to pull together those two. And there are examples, I think, of where it's being solved, and there's other problems where it could be becoming more tricky. I live in the west coast of Ireland, so I use my BBC website a lot. And what I've noticed, for example, is the ads that the BBC are putting on individual programs when I want to click onto something, I've got longer. Now, no one's admitted this, no one's warned me, but they've moved from 10 seconds to 20 seconds now, sometimes for 30 seconds. It's 30 seconds with the first one and less for the second. So what you've got is a creeping issue and a lack of transparency, and I would say also a lack of dialogue. The BBC have tried to up their revenues, but on the other hand, I'm a punter, and sooner or later I will move off. Without any doubt at all. I'll get fed up and I'll find another source. An example where I think they're being very successful is the New York Times. I use New York Times every day. It's probably my most used site. And I find, whilst it has a lot of, in a sense, cookies and ads, they are remarkably unobtrusive. And I never feel I'm being invaded or used. On the other hand, I think it's $13 a month for the privilege of accessing it, which is not cheap. So I think what isn't happening is I think that the consumer is not being given a set of options, which is, is this the type of information you want? Is this being presented the way you want it? In which case, this is what it's going to cost you. If you don't want to pay, yes, I'm afraid your viewing pleasure is going to be polluted, because we're just going to find every single way we can to scrape some money out of the barrel. And I think it's that debate which, it's not a debate, unfortunately, it's that issue which is causing alarm. And it's that issue where there's an extraordinary lack of transparency and resolution. There isn't a resolution as yet. I think an event like today can help a great deal, because as I'm suggesting, I think importantly, there is a debate that's needed. It's a debate that's not being had, and it's a debate that needs flagging. My concern is we begin to devalue information. By information, I'm principally interested in news, but news and information, because the pollution of the ads begins to confuse people. I've got two very, very bright young granddaughters, both of whom are in New York, both of whom are at college, who probably find it quite difficult to differentiate between the merchandising messages they're receiving and the useful information they're receiving. It's not difficult. For years and years and years, newspapers had a top of page had two things. In fact, I saw it yesterday in the Irish Times, I think. There was news and there was comment and opinion. And they differentiate very clearly between news and comment and opinion. And then, of course, there was advertising. Well, what's happened over the last few years? The word advertising or advertisement has got smaller. The confusion between comment and news has become quite deliberately obfuscated. And it's little surprise, really, that the reader isn't sure at any given time whether they're looking at hard news, comment, or an ad. And that suits the advertiser admirably. I was reading a really interesting piece yesterday about second screening and the fact that brands are beginning to use the second screen because so many, particularly teenagers, are second screening or watching something else when they're watching a movie. And does this represent an opportunity? Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting area, because that's a very discrete audience. It may be a growing audience. It's an age demographic. And I suppose if you really want a second screen, you've got to accept the fact, you've got to take your lumps and accept the fact that the level of pollution might increase. On the other hand, what I'm really saying is, you ought to be able to make a judgment as a consumer. Say, this is the way I want to consume my media. This is what I'm prepared to pay for it. And I don't want ads. I don't want ads. That privilege is likely to cost me, let's say, I'm making this up, 50 quid a year to not have ads in my life. That ought to be my choice. I shouldn't have to be battered or kind of corralled into watching things and then have the revenue stream begin to attack literally my concentration. I'm reading a piece in the New York Times. I do not want it to be interfered with by suddenly a cookie popping up or or some sound coming. I just don't want that. But that's the privilege of my age, and sort of the privilege of the fact that I'm prepared to pay to enjoy my privilege. Mm-hmm. I think micropayments are a solution, but again, if it really can be a solution, it's a great solution. If I know I've paid, or if I know I've got an account which each time I look at something clicks up a certain amount of money, that's all right. Really, what I'm suggesting here is the notion that brands are beginning to want their cake and eat it. As to say, they would like to take... An agent many years ago, it's the most profound thing I can say to you, an agent many, many years ago when I was in the movie business said to me, you've got to understand, David, my job is to take as much money off the table as I possibly can, irrespective of what it does to your movie. I.e., it wasn't his problem whether it was actually damaging my film by removing an extra $1 million for this client or this client or that client. That wasn't his problem. His problem was to take as much money off the table. My concern is that we're looking at something not dissimilar, that in the desire to take as much money off the table by the commercial brands, we're reaching a point where actually the world of information is being actively damaged, and that would be very unfortunate. Many years ago I joined an ad agency as a chairman, and one of the reasons they came and asked me to join is that they felt that what they needed was more expertise, and they wanted to develop their ability to tell stories. I remember that was exactly the conversation we had. The ad agency itself turned out to be pretty successful. I'm very glad I worked with them. But we never ever cracked, or even, we never created the mechanisms for cracking the storytelling bit. I don't think anyone was ever employed at the agency, ever, because of an ability to tell a story. So that's a kind of active intervention. When I go back 100 years ago, when I joined Collett Dickinson Pierce, there was very clear vision by the senior management there of the type of agency they wanted. And that did involve a form of storytelling, and they went out of their way to hire people who could do that. I've never seen that as a kind of stream of activity that seems to be being pushed through with determination. But it's the right way to go, there's no question about that. But I'd be very, very, very surprised if there are graduates coming out of media courses all over the UK who have been kind of told or taught that their principal world in the advertising and merchandising world, that their principal job is storytelling. I'd be very surprised. They'll be told that their job is impact. And there's a lot of difference between impact and storytelling.